Hey everybody, John Mark here. Welcome to the second video in a video series where Kurt Doolittle and I are going to be going through a second American Constitution. We can call it Constitution 2.0 for America 2.0. Make sure you watch part 1 in this video series because it has a lot of important background information and it goes into a lot of the key policies that are really going to hit home for you so you can see how this is going to improve your life. But in this second video, we're going to be going through the table of contents of the Constitution itself. And as you can see, these are 4 introductory videos, and then we're going to go into some more in-depth videos where we're going through the Constitution article by article. So in this video, you're going to get a brief overview of the contents of the Constitution itself, so you can see how it's laid out. And as you'll see, the way it's laid out is actually important in certain ways. A couple quick reminders. This Constitution fixes a lot of the mistakes that were made after the original Constitution and even in the original Constitution, and just mistakes that we now know are mistakes that in the past we maybe didn't realize how bad the mistake was, or we didn't know how to fix it and now we do. Also, a quick reminder, we definitely want you to ask questions. In the YouTube comments is a great place to ask questions. I try to go in there and make sure I answer as many as I can. And at the same time, we just ask you not to speak confidently in ignorance, and don't make a critique without offering a solution. Don't compare this to some kind of fictional utopia that doesn't exist and will never exist. We have to go with the best solution that's possible, and we really know how to do that now. We have so much history, so much easy access to information. With the internet, so much science. We really do have a great solution here, and we know how to do a lot of things and fix a lot of problems that we didn't know in the past, or maybe we were doing some of those things in the past and we abandoned them. And then before we jump into it with Kurt here, just want to mention that I have a couple of playlists. I will put the links in the top comment. And if you watch especially the first couple videos in the Propertarianism Basics playlist, that is really going to help you understand, especially what we're talking about today in this video, where we're going to be going into how important rule of law is. So you'll understand more about that from these videos and from the playlist that I have. I strongly encourage you to watch at least the first 2 or 3 of the videos in that Propertarianism Basics playlist, because that will really help you understand. All right, so let's get into it. Keep in mind here, we recorded these first 4 introductory videos in one sitting, and we decided it would be better for the audience if we broke it up into these 4 introductory videos. So what you're about to see is a little bit later in the recording, and we're kind of referring back to when we were earlier in the recording talking about the prosecution and the first part before the Constitution itself, which is really laid out like a court case. So we're going to refer briefly to that just so you understand what's going on when we talk about that, and you will get to see that in video number 3 and video number 4 that I'm going to put out shortly after this one. But just understand that that's what we're referring back to. And then in this section, we're going into how the Constitution itself is laid out.
All right. The last part is the actual Constitution. So what we've talked about is all the stuff before it. We've talked about the context of it, the problems we're trying to solve, the differences of it, but then we get down to the actual table of contents.
Yes.
And the Constitution, which consists of this table of contents, is meant to be standalone. So all the stuff that went into the case, meant that is one document, and the Constitution to be standalone. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So the Constitution can be standalone. The other is a foundation for the Constitution.
It's just like the Federalist Papers. If you want to know why something's there, that's where it is. But, you know,
that makes sense.
Not everybody needs to read 800 pages of stuff.
It provides additional context and reasoning and detail.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
So the first part's the introduction. It's a summary of the case. There's a Declaration of Independence, or exact declaration. It's not of independence, but a declaration, which is structured very similarly out of respect for the original Declaration. And it basically is a list of the crimes.
Okay. Makes sense.
All right. The preamble is the next piece, and that shows how this Constitution modifies the existing Constitution. And there's a really important reason for doing that. And that's that the United States is what's called a going concern. And so you actually don't want to have the state, which is like it's literally like an international corporation. It's just a huge one.
Yes.
You don't want to have it cease being a going concern, because that creates all sorts of financial, political, monetary chaos around the world. So, for example, China owes us trillions of dollars from when it was communist China. though they don't want to pay us because they say, well, it's a new government, we're a new corporation. Yeah.
That makes sense. So we're not just starting this from scratch. We're taking into account the fact that this is a going concern.
Right. It's just the idea is that it produces a going concern. Now, in that preamble, it's an article by article whether this replaces, modifies, or is now unnecessary.
Yes.
Right. And so that's what it does. And it's meant to do that so that you can see we are maintaining the United States as a going concern, and that these are just a set of amendments that are passed that revoke certain amendments and implement new amendments.
That makes a lot of sense. And if you read that portion, you'll see basically a list. You'll see a list of the amendments, and this one we're keeping, or this one we're revoking and replacing it, etc. It's very clear when you look at it.
Okay. Now, there's something really interesting. The first three articles are man, the law, and rights and obligations. And you notice they're before anything about government.
Very important point. Law is the most important. Law is prior to government, yes.
So the first article is called man. You know all the stuff that they do in our law where they mess with definitions, and the left is great at this, is that they pretend that the Constitution is a living document rather than a freaking accounting system where changes to it are supposed to be processed in a very orderly fashion, producing transactions. Right?
Yes. So you have a lot of definitions to prevent that sort of thing from happening.
So that section will drive you nuts if you try to look through it.
But it's absolutely necessary.
What a woman is, what moral is, it defines everything. And so it defines the nature of man so that we can't pretend that the nature of man isn't as scientifically demonstrated.
My note that I wrote down on that article, Kurt, was it's really an empirical observation of how human beings operate as individuals and as groups. And so it might seem like it's not important, but you said it is so important precisely because the left tries to pretend that things are so different than they actually are.
For the programmers out there, you have constants.
I'm sure the programmers will like that one.
There's data types, right? There's a constant. Something can only have these three values, or there's a type. Something can only have these three values, right? That's what it does. It makes it so that when you're using words in the law, they have concrete meaning. If you study the law today, it's a little bit like studying poetry. Well, American contract law at present is really close to programming, which any decent lawyer will tell you. It retains a lot of archaic prose, and it requires a lot of bad behavior that this eliminates. The definitions eliminate.
Very important to have clear, specific definitions.
Okay. So I can't tell you just how important those definitions are to the law. That is half of the problem. If you can't lie about man, it's very hard to make a law that's irreciprocal. Right?
Very important.
All right. So the second article is the law, which is what it is and how to write it. In other words, same thing. What does law mean? What are the different kinds? You probably don't know this, but there's a debate about what law means. There are basically four rough theories of jurisprudence. This is the strict one. This is probably the strictest. I would actually say this is a new one. It's so strict, and because at one end you have people like us who say law is just tort. It's just tort, and the left says law is political. It's whatever we can get away with.
And can you explain the word tort, Kurt, for the audience?
Tort. The word tort comes from trespass. And so that's what trespass. I can't trespass against you, your goods, your home, your property, your wife.
Any form of property.
Any form of property. And property in proprietarianism is extraordinarily well articulated. So basically it says, when libertarians call it the non-aggression, very poorly, we call it the law of tort, or as Aristotle would call it, the natural law.
Yes. It's so very specific definitions here and a very strict jurisprudence. And again, I want to point this out for the audience. A lot of us are very aware that our current judges, they're getting away with legislating from the bench, things like this. And what this is doing is cutting that out by having such strict jurisprudence that they are not going to be able to get away with that.
Right. And here's one of the things in the law is how it must be constructed. Right now, you can write a lot of nonsense and leave it open to interpretation. You can't do that anymore under proprietary law. It's an example that made me furious today. Some woman's in court. I saw it in the news. Someone's be taken to court because she and her husband were hanging up plasterboard, and she's walking around in her brassiere, and he's walking around with no shirt on because of all the dust, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the kids come in, and she's the stepmom. So what does the mom do? The mom accuses her of child abuse. And you know, this is like this is actually in court. Now, of course, under propertism, you'd have, in order to say so, you'd have to write it down exactly what it was in the whereas. So, like now, you say you can make a law about anything, but in proprietarianism, it's like an algorithm. Whereas A, B, C, and D. Now, given A, B, C, and D, whereas E, F, G, H, and I. Therefore, we wish to, and such. And so you have to fill out all these pieces. And when you do that, you have to make it operationally testable statements. So it's not really possible to expand the law without making a concrete argument from reciprocity forward on why that's possible.
So you don't have all these wishy-washy, squishy definitions of things. Somebody can't just say, well, that's child abuse and kind of make up their own definition of child abuse or interpretation. Right. Everything has to be very strictly constructed, so you can't get away with that kind of thing.
Right. And even if you were to, like we have misnaming of laws all the time in order to create a false impression among people. Like even if you misnamed the law, you could be punished for it.
Wow, that's great.
And so the next thing is you have to sign the law.
You have to sign the law, you said?
Right, and you're liable for it.
You personally have to sign the law if you make a law of any kind, you're saying? As a person with
you're
power?
Liable for it.
And would this apply to judges as well, personally?
It applies to everybody.
Anybody that does that is liable for what they do.
Anyone.
That's awesome.
You have personal liability for your judgments. Not just judges, politicians.
That's great.
So you're liable. Now, there's none of this stuff with let's pass it and get away. Let's pass it and leave it up to everybody else to figure out.
Everybody has skin in the game.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
So, honestly, the rest of it is stuff it's how does the court operate, right? How does this, what is the state? What are there are only four things to a state in the federal government, which is the state, which means the corporation and its assets, the military, the regiments, and the militia. And yes, it's remilitarizing the society. If you want to know why we're going to remilitarize society, just ask why all the men are unhappy. I'll explain it to you. It puts the treasury in place.
All right, so then after this is when we started talking about the policies, and if you want to hear that part, that's in video number 1 of this series. So I will put the link on the screen momentarily. The link will also be in the top comment, and that's where you'll hear about some of the specific policies that are outlined in some of the subsequent articles of the Constitution itself. So hopefully you have a pretty good idea of how the Constitution itself is laid out. In videos number 3 and 4, we're going to be going into more of the goals for this Second American Constitution, the objectives, and then we're going to talk more about that section that comes before the Constitution itself, where it's like a prosecution, like a court case laid out that is prosecuting our enemies. And you're going to see why that's important, because we have to make sure that we fix these problems once and for all, and that section is very important for that purpose. So make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Stay tuned for videos 3 and 4 that are going to come out soon, and the videos after that where we're going to be going into some of the articles of the Constitution itself more in detail. Thanks everybody, till next time.